Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. This video explores the biblical story of Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38, which is retold in the Apocryphal Testament of Judah and also in the Book of Jubilees. Genesis 38 disrupts the flow of the story of Joseph with an absolutely bizarre story regarding one of Joseph's brothers, Judah, and his relationship with his daughter-in-law, Tamar. We will look at this story in 4 sections. Judah, the fourth-born son of Jacob, had 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Judah found his firstborn a wife named Tamar. However, according to the Bible, and Judah's firstborn was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. In other words, God killed him. Now, as per the custom in Levirate marriages, the duty of the next brother in line, being Onan, was to marry and impregnate his dead brother's widow, to carry his brother's name and ensure his inheritance. Now, although Onan took Tamar as his wife, he refused to impregnate her, as the child would be classed as his dead brother's and not his own. So instead of conceiving a child with Tamar, Onan wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. In other words, he ejaculated on the floor rather than inside his wife. According to the biblical narrative, it was a vile act that displeased God, and so God killed him too. The Bible makes no mention of the actual sin the first son had done, but the Talmud, Midrash, rabbinical teachings, and the Yehimot gives explanations such as abnormal intercourse. Other explanations include did not want Tamar to become disfigured through pregnancy. He wanted to preserve her beauty, in other words, to treat her as a sex object rather than as the mother of his children, and he too performed the same act and refused to ejaculate inside his wife. The fact is, God killed 2 brothers for not wishing to impregnate their wife. Now, twice widowed Tamar was childless and alone. Her father-in-law Judah was expected to provide another of his sons for her to marry, but rather than offer his 3rd son, Judah refused, telling her to go to her father's house until his son Shelah grows up, as he was afraid that he too may die like his brothers. And then the story takes another odd turn. Later, after Judah's wife had died, Tamar heard that her father-in-law was coming to the area, so she disguised herself as a prostitute and offered herself to Judah. Strangely, Judah did not recognize her. Judah offered to send her a goat for payment for her services, but she wanted his signet, bracelet, and staff to hold until he had sent the goat. They agreed, they had sex, and she got pregnant. Judah did try to honor the agreement and sent a goat to her, but could not locate her as no one in the area was aware of this prostitute. 3 months later, Judah learned that Tamar was pregnant. He insisted Tamar be burnt to death as punishment for her promiscuity, as she was meant to preserve herself as a widow. She went to Judah and presented the staff, signet, and bracelet which he had given to her on the night of their encounter, to prove that he was in fact the father. Judah changed his mind and no longer wanted to punish this prostitute, as he was the father of her unborn child, and said, "She is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son." The final part of this story is also quite strange. During the birth of her twins, one baby puts his hand out, and the midwife tied a thread around his wrist, saying, "This one is the firstborn." The baby put his hand back in, and the other brother came out first. So they named him Perez, and his brother Zara. Given the long list of immoral acts throughout the Bible, it is disturbing that God justified the killing of two brothers for a relatively minor act that did not really harm anyone. The narrative makes no sense. The immoral acts of Judah goes unpunished. He had no intention of marrying off his third son to Tamar, an inexcusable neglect of his fatherly duties and injustice to Tamar. Not only that, but Judah had grossly assumed that Tamar was the cause of his two sons' death, and failed to acknowledge and address the sins of his own children. The author clearly defends Judah, saying that he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law, thus not being guilty of incest. His intercourse with a prostitute is never questioned from an ethical point of view. No moral judgment is passed on it. In Israel's patriarchal society, impingement of another man's property was strictly forbidden as against the law, but sexual relations with a woman who does not belong to any man, such as a prostitute, caused no problem. It was Tamar who was deemed immoral, as she acted as a prostitute and got pregnant, yet nothing immoral was cast on Judah for sleeping with a prostitute. Once he realized it was he who slept with her and impregnated her, the situation was casually overlooked and swept under the carpet. The whole story is written from the male's point of view, and like other stories in the Bible, the woman is generally at fault. Clearly, in this biblical text, failure to impregnate your wife was worse than sleeping with prostitutes or tricking a man into getting pregnant. This story doesn't end here. In part 2, we see how this story is even more disturbing and nonsensical. Stay tuned. Thank you.